Welcome back to the channel. In this episode we're going to be taking the engine and gearbox out. If you remember from previous videos, there's actually nothing wrong with the engine, it doesn't need to come out, but the gearbox does, because that needs replacing as it keeps jumping out of first gear. So I've got the gearbox ready to go, so hopefully it'll be a fairly quick job just to get the engine out, change the gearbox and then put it all back in again. So one thing that'll make this considerably easier for me is I've got the fiberglass flip front on, so by removing that it gives me full access to the front end, so that should make replacing the engine and gearbox a little bit easier. But once the engine's back in, I've got to rebuild the front end as well, in order that the car can comply with next year's regulations. So we'll go through this step by step. To save you having to watch it all, we'll speed some of it up, and I'll put up on the screen the things that are doing, the steps that I'm taking, so that if you need to do a similar job, you've got some idea of some of the things you need to disconnect and remove in order to do the job. First then, we're going to remove some of the breather pipework on the engine, and then we can get rid of the water system, crack open the radiator and release all the water out of the cooling system, so we can get the radiator off the front. That should then give us access to the main engine. We can start to have a look at things like the alternator. On the electrics on the left side, we need to disconnect the coil and some of the timing, the ignition system. And of course, the big thing on the other side of the engine is the exhaust and the carburettors, so we'll need to get those out of the way. Bit of a tip here, if you've never taken an engine and gearbox out before on a Midget, make sure you take the gearbox oil out, because as the engine and gearbox come up and it tilts down, the prop shaft comes out, and guess what? The oil comes out onto your garage floor. One final thing I've noticed here, although I've undone these nuts here on these engine mounts, this still probably won't be able to get the engine out, because these mounts bolted to the chassis and they won't be able to move. So I'm going to undo the 6 bolts that are holding these lower engine mounts as well, and the engine should then come straight up. So that's not bad. We're a couple of hours in and we've already done most of the work that gets this engine out. So the front radiator's off, all the alternator, water pump assembly, electrics around this side and the ignition, and around this side 6 nuts enables us to take all the carburettors off and get the exhaust out of the way. We've got the nuts disconnected for the engine mounts down here. So in reality now, next thing to do is to undo the bolts holding the gearbox in place, and from that point on it's ready to pull out. So there's my clutch pipe disconnected and tucked out of the way so that won't snag when I lift the gearbox out. You'll notice I've left the starter on, so that should not foul anything when the whole thing comes out, so I can afford to leave that on. You'll notice I've left the distributor in as well. The timing on this car has been set on a rolling road, so to try and avoid having to go back and have another session so soon, I'm trying my hardest not to knock or touch that distributor at all. I'm going to leave that in place for removal as well. Inside the car, a few things need to happen. First of all, take the carpet off if you've got it, and your gear knob. This is the flap for topping up the oil when you put the gearbox back in. You might, it's quite dark actually, but you might be able to see there's a cap there on the gearbox. That's where the oil goes in. That's how you fill it back up again. There's 2 bolts, one either side of the tunnel here, where the rear gearbox mount is screwed in, and there's 2 bolts directly underneath this cross member, underneath the middle of the car, that need to be removed as well. The gear stick will need to come out, so we've got 4 screws to get at that, and then 3 bolts around the end of the gearbox to fit that as well. So let's get that off. So that's everything off the engine now, ready to lift, so we can bring the engine hoist in order to do its job. Just got to remember to disconnect the speedo cable and the reverse switch cables as the unit starts to come out. And there it is, the engine all removed with its gearbox. Now a nice easy job to take the gearbox off and fit the new one. So let's get that gearbox off. There then is the Midget engine bay sans engine, so it can be cleaned up now, ready for inserting the new engine and box back in again. There we have it then, how to take an engine and gearbox out of an MG Midget. I won't bore you with the reverse procedure that puts it all back in, but if you put it back in the same way you took it out, just being mindful, it's helpful to put the prop shaft on first, so you take the whole thing through with the prop shaft on, then you haven't got to worry about getting the prop shaft on when the gearbox is down the tunnel. I hope you found that useful and inspired you to have a go with your own MG Midget if you need to get your engine or gearbox out, or indeed if you want to take it out to paint your engine bay. So that's the next job done. We're going to put the gearbox and the engine back in, and then we can rebuild the front end of the car. So plenty to look forward to. Thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, thanks for all your comments and input. See you on the next video.